I have logged 11,000 salvages in my service to the provision. I am writing this one down by hand, in my own characters. On paper I cut myself from a ration liner, because the Combine's recording instruments are no longer trustworthy to me, and because I want a version of these events that no provisioner above me can edit before it is read. My name is Oris Tan. I was salvage master aboard the Harvester Patient Yield, fourth of the Slate-Hulled trawlers assigned to the quiet sectors above the water world we had catalogued only as Site Blue. I am Greel. I tell you that first, before anything else, because the rest of this will not make sense unless you understand what a Greel believes about the universe, and how completely that belief failed me in the span of a single working rotation. We are a noble caste, the provisioners. I do not say that to boast. I say it because nobility among my kind is not a matter of blood or favor or wealth. It is a matter of certainty. A Greel of the provision is raised from the shell to be certain, certain of the manifest, certain of the value table, certain of where every living thing sits on the long ladder of usefulness that descends from the Combine at the top, through the noble castes, down past the labor and the indentured and the chattel, all the way to the raw biomass at the bottom. We do not hate the creatures we process. Hatred would be a kind of respect, and respect among my kind is a thing reserved for the certain. We simply sort. We have sorted the galaxy's drifting wreckage for 900 years, and in 900 years the latter has never once been wrong. That is what I believed. I want you to understand that I believed it the way you believe in the floor beneath your feet, not as an opinion, but as a fact so deep you have never once thought to test it. The Patient Yield was a good ship for the work, and I had earned her. Slate purple hull, the color of our caste, deliberately dulled so it would not catch a planet's light and announce itself to anything still capable of running. A harvester is mostly hold. The bridge is a small armored dome set forward, where the salvage master can watch the planet turn beneath him, and behind that dome stretches the long body of the ship, the netting bay, the intake throat, the holding hold, the assessment gallery, and at the stern the processing deck, where the value table stops being a column of figures and becomes a physical fact. I had a crew of 9. I trusted 7 of them with my life and would have spent mine for theirs. The other 2 were the Combine's eyes, placed aboard the way the Combine places its eyes aboard every harvester, and I had long since stopped pretending I did not know what they were and why they watched me. We trawled the quiet sectors because that was where the easy salvage drifted. The lanes are picked clean. A thing that fails in a lane is recovered or stripped within a watch. But beyond the lanes, in the wide cold dark where no rescue runs, things fail and simply keep going. Ships that ran out of fuel, lifeboats whose beacons died mid-cry, crews that made one navigational error too many and went silent over a world too far from anything to expect help. Those drift, sometimes for years, and they drift toward the gravity of whatever lies in their path, and what lay in the path of that sector was the water world. A great blue eye, white-banded, turning slowly under the hard, bright daylight that came off its cloud tops and filled my dome with cold, clean light for half of every rotation. It was beautiful in the way that lethal things are beautiful. We had catalogued the system as uninhabited. We had catalogued the planet itself as a hazard so high on our scale that no salvage crew of any species would set down on it voluntarily. A crushing pull, a poisoned air to most lungs, a biosphere that the catalogers had flagged and then declined to study further, because there was no profit in a world that killed your survey team faster than it paid you. We had been wrong about the planet. I did not yet know in what direction we had been wrong, or that the answer was already drifting toward my netting bay. I should tell you what a working rotation aboard the Patient Yield was like before she came, because I want you to understand that this was ordinary labor done by ordinary creatures, and not a den of monsters. That is the part outsiders never grasp about my caste, and it is the part that matters most. We were not cruel. Cruelty would have required us to see the catches as something a cruelty could be done to, and we did not. We saw cargo. The morning of the day she came, we had processed a freighter crew of 6, A reptilian species, green-scaled, that had run their drive past its tolerance, fleeing a debt I neither knew nor cared about, and drifted into our sector with their air going foul. Sol had netted them clean. The deck had read their fear in under a watch mark, found the shape of it, pressed, and harvested a good yield, well above the table's estimate. We had logged it, sorted the remainder, and gone to our rest cycle the way you go to rest after any honest day's work, tired and unbothered, the planet turning bright and clean below the dome. I tell you this so you understand the certainty was not malice. It was worse than malice. Malice at least sees its object. The certainty did not see anything at all. The reptilian crew had screamed and thrashed and flooded the deck with exactly the chemistry the table predicted, and their screaming had confirmed the latter the way every catch's screaming had confirmed the latter for 900 years, and we had gone to sleep certain and woken certain, and that was the whole of it. The latter did not need us to enjoy it. It only needed the catches to be afraid, and they always were. I want that on the page before I write down what came next. Every single creature this ship had ever held had been afraid, and we had built our entire understanding of the universe on the back of that one fact, and not one of us had ever once thought to ask what would happen on the rotation it stopped being true. But the day it began, the netting bay flagged a single contact. Small, slow, drifting on a ballistic fall toward the blue planet's upper reach. A lifeboat, the kind a larger ship ejects when it knows it is dying, a coffin with an engine, built to keep one or a few alive for the short window in which rescue is plausible, and then, when rescue does not come, to keep them alive a little longer than is merciful. The beacon was weak and poolsing in a pattern none of my instruments recognized. Not a distress format we had on file, not a combine code, not any of the 400 standard cries for help that a harvester is built to recognize and ignore, because a harvester does not answer distress. It collects the wreckage distress leaves behind. I remember the pattern struck me as wrong, and it took me a moment to name why. It was calm. A distress beacon is supposed to scream a tight, urgent, repeating burst, the electromagnetic equivalent of a thing thrashing in a snare. This one ticked, slow, steady, evenly spaced with a patience to the spacing like something keeping deliberate time. I had heard 10,000 beacons and they all had the same animal panic in them. This one had none. I noted it, and I did not understand it, and I gave the order anyway. One occupant, my netting officer reported. His name was Sol. He was young and good and careful, and he is dead now, though not in the way you are probably imagining as you read that. Biped, endothermic, small body mass well under standard, reads low value across the table. Net it, I said. This is the part I have replayed most. Net it. 2 syllables. I gave the order the way I had given it 11,000 times, with no more thought than a creature gives to its own breathing. The net deployed a cradle of containment field, not metal, a shaped volume of force that closes around a catch and draws it in without bruising the cargo, because bruised cargo harvests poorly. It took the lifeboat through the intake throat and down into the holding hold and set it on the deck floor as gently as a parent sets down a sleeping child. The whole operation took less than a watch mark. I logged it. 1 lifeboat, 1 occupant, low value, routine, schedule standard. I expected the occupant to be dead, or so near it as to make no difference, because most of them are by the time they drift into the quiet sectors. Salvage is patient work. The galaxy does almost all of the killing for us. We mostly arrive afterward and sort. She was not dead. The holding hold has an assessment gallery, a strip of armored glass set above the floor of the hold, where the salvage master can look down on a catch and confirm the table's rating before the catch is scheduled. The value table is precise, but a salvage master's eye is the final word. And I took pride in my eye. I had assessed catches of every species the latter knew, and a great many it had not yet catalogued. I went down to the gallery, as I always did, expecting to spend the standard interval, confirm the low-value rating, and slot her behind 2 more profitable hauls already waiting their turn at the deck. She was sitting on the floor of the hold with her back against the wall of her own opened lifeboat, and she was looking up at the gallery glass. At me, at the exact place where I stood. She should not have been able to see me. The gallery glass is one way, mirrored on the hold side, and the hold lighting is kept low specifically to reduce a ketch's agitation, because an agitated ketch begins burning its harvestable chemistry early and arrives at the deck depleted. I have stood at that glass over thousands of ketches, and not one of them ever found me. They thrash, or they cower, or they go still in the particular collapsed way of a thing that has given up, but they do not look at the salvage master, because they cannot see him. She had heard me, perhaps, heard the gallery hatch, felt some shift in the hold's air, and she had turned her dirty, disordered head and found me through a mirror, and now she was watching me with an expression for which I had no entry in any field of my catalog. I assessed her the way I had assessed 11,000 catches before her. Small Soul's reading had been accurate, a low body mass even for a biped, the build of a thing that had been living lean for a long time. 2 arms, a head, the unremarkable bilateral architecture of 1,000 minor species. Her covering was a dull gray garment, torn at one shoulder, stained dark down one side with something long dried. Her face was streaked with grime. There was a thin-heeled line above one eye, an old scratch gone to a pale scar. Her hair was short and dark and cut without care, growing out unevenly. By every measure my cast is trained to apply, she was exactly what the value table had said she was. A beaten, stranded, low-mass animal at the bottom of a very long fall, waiting to be sorted. And she was watching me with the patience of something that had already finished a calculation I had not yet begun. I told myself it was a trick of the low light, an accident of the angle, the meaningless reflex of a frightened thing that had happened to turn its head my way. I logged the assessment. Low value, confirmed, schedule standard. I went back up to my dome. I did not think about her again for most of a rotation, and that incuriosity, that refusal to look twice at the one catch that had looked back, was the first mistake of this affair that was entirely my own, owed to no combine, no eye, no order from above. I made it freely, out of the certainty I had been raised in. I record it here so that it is on the page in my own characters. I saw the impossible thing on the first day, and I looked away from it, because the ladder told me it could not be there. I must explain how the processing deck works, because everything that followed turns on it, and because I have come to believe that the Grial who designed it 900 years ago made an error so deep that no one in 900 years had ever been in a position to notice it. I was not in a position to notice it either. I operated that deck for my entire career and called its design genius. I will call it genius no longer. We do not simply kill what we catch. To simply kill would be to waste the single most valuable thing a living creature produces, which is not its meat, and not its labor, and not the metals in its blood, but its fear. A frightened organism floods itself with chemistries, the stress compounds, the panic cascade, the deep old biochemical soup that a body manufactures when it believes it is about to die and throws everything it has into not dying. Those compounds, drawn at the exact peak of terror and stabilized before the heart fails, are the most prized substance in the combine's entire value table. They are medicine to some buyers and intoxicant to others, and something I will not speculate about to the worst of them. The point is the price, and the price is enormous, and the processing deck exists to produce the peak and harvest the flood. It is, in the plainest words I can set down, a machine for frightening a living creature to the precise edge of death and drawing off the terror at its crest, in the last interval before the heart stops. We are very good at it. 900 years of refinement have gone into that deck. It reads a catch's vital signs as it enters, models the specific architecture of that creature's fear, and applies pressure tuned to it. The slow advance of the walls, the drop of the light into whatever spectrum that species reads as threat, the playback of the dying sounds of its own kind, assembled from recordings or, for an uncatalogued species, improvised from the deck's models. The deck finds the shape of a thing's terror and it presses on that shape, patiently, relentlessly, until the chemistry peaks. Then we harvest, then we sort the small remainder that is left. Here is the hinge. The deck cannot proceed without the fear. The entire mechanism is built downstream of panic. It assumes the panic the way a greel assumes the ladder, as the bedrock everything else stands on. You do not build a contingency for the thing that has never once failed to be true. And in 900 years, fear had never failed. Every catch had been afraid. The armored ones were afraid. The ones with no nervous system we could find were afraid in their own chemistries. The ones whose minds were utterly alien to anything greel were afraid in ways the deck had to be retuned to read, but they were afraid. Fear was the constant. Fear was the floor beneath the deck's feet. No one had ever stood in that deck and not been afraid, and so no one had ever discovered what the deck would do and fail to do if a catch simply declined. Her turn at the deck came 2 rotations after we netted her, behind the 2 more profitable hauls. I went down to watch, as a salvage master does. The eye is the final word, and the deck is where the word is spoken. The deck operator was Vetch, the senior of the Combine's 2 eyes, a hard, cold greel who enjoyed the work in a way the rest of us were trained not to examine too closely, and certainly not to name. He had her vitals up on his readout, the slow, steady pulse of a small endothermic biped. He cycled the deck up. The walls began their patient inward advance. The lighting dropped through the spectrum into the band that most bipeds read as threat. The deck's voice began the dying sounds, which for her uncatalogued kind it had to improvise. A low, wet, broken sound of distress assembled from the deck's own modeling of what a creature like her ought to sound like as it died. She was not against the wall. She had moved to the center of the deck floor where she could see all of it at once, and she was watching the operator's readout through the deck's inner glass, the same flat, patient watching she had given me through the gallery, and the readout did not climb. As the walls closed and the light threatened and the deck howled the sound of her own modeled death into every surface around her, the small, dirty biped in the center of the processing deck did not flood with panic chemistry because she was not producing any. Her heart rate, displayed on Vetch's readout as a slow, even pulse, did not rise. It dropped. "Adjust," Vetch said. He was not concerned yet. Concern was not a thing the Combine's eyes permitted themselves. Catches sometimes took an interval to understand their situation, and a slow start only meant a higher peak later. He widened the threat spectrum. He brought the walls in faster, to the rate that broke the armored ones. He raised the dying sounds until the deck shook with them. The deck is relentless and it is thorough. I had watched it break creatures I would have sworn had no fear in them, find the hidden shape of their terror and press until it cracked. It pressed on her now with everything 900 years had built into it. Her vitals stayed flat, then lower. As the trap screamed around her, she slowed her own heart, deliberately, the way you might slow your breathing to listen for a sound in the dark, and the panic the deck was built to harvest did not come, because she had not consented to produce it. Vetch ran the deck a full watch mark past the point where any catch in my entire career had broken. The walls reached their minimum safe stop. The deck will not crush a catch, because a crushed catch harvests nothing, and that limit is hard set into the mechanism, and they halted there, a hand's breadth from her shoulders. She stood in the small space that was left. With the walls almost touching her and the threat light full in her face and the sound of her own death pouring from every surface, and she closed her eyes, and she rested. She lowered herself in that hand's breadth of space into a posture of rest, and she waited, and her slow heart slowed further toward sleep. I had stood at that glass over thousands of catches. I had never once seen a thing rest inside the trap. "It's broken," Vetch said. He meant the deck. He cycled it down, ran a full diagnostic, found nothing wrong, every system nominal, every reading clean. He cycled it up again. Same result. Flat vitals, a slowing heart. A creature the most refined fear machine in 900 years of the provision could not frighten because, and I understood this only slowly over the rotations that followed, the way you understand the true depth of cold water only after you are already past your depth in it. Because somewhere in the long drift before we caught her, she had concluded that being afraid was not useful to her, and she had simply stopped being afraid, and she had not started again. We pulled her off the deck. There was nothing to harvest, not a trace, the lowest yield the deck had ever logged. I recorded it as an anomaly, a malfunction, and I scheduled her for reprocessing in 2 rotations, certain the fault lay in the machine. It did not lie in the machine. I want that on the page too, in my own characters. I was certain and I was wrong, and the certainty was the whole of my error. I began to visit the gallery. I told myself it was diligence, that a salvage master who cannot frighten a catch has a working problem to solve, and that solving it was my proper labor. But I have thought a great deal about it since, in the long, quiet rotations after, and I think the truth is plainer and worse for my cast than that. I went because in 11,000 salvages I had never encountered a thing I did not understand, and the not understanding had a pull to it, the way an unhealed wound pulls at the attention. A grill does not know how to leave a thing unsorted. I would stand at the gallery glass and watch her, and she would sit against the opened wall of her lifeboat, and after the first few visits she stopped pretending she could not see me through the mirror, and simply looked up and looked back, and waited for whatever I had come to do. On the 4th visit, I did a thing no salvage master does. I keyed the gallery's audio channel, the one we use to pipe the dying sounds down into the hold, for the catches who break better when they hear what is coming, and instead of the sounds, I spoke. The deck had by then built a rough linguistic bridge to her kind, assembled from the structure buried in that calm ticking beacon, which had carried far more language in it than we had first realized. My cast speech went down into the hold, rendered into her tongue. "You should be afraid," I told her. "Every creature this ship has ever held has been afraid. The machine that processes you is built entirely on it. You are making the work impossible. Why are you not afraid?" She was quiet a moment, turning it over with that flat patience. Then she said, and the deck rendered her voice level, and even, with none of the chemistry of panic under it, none of the tells my instruments were built to read, "Being afraid wouldn't change where I am. It would change what we are able to harvest from you. It would change how you are processed, and how long that takes, and how it ends." "I know what you harvest," she said. "I watched the readout while your operator ran the room. You need me scared. The whole thing only works if I'm scared." She tilted the dirty, disordered head and looked up at the glass where I stood, unerring. "So I'm not going to be scared. You built a machine that only runs if I agree to play. I'm not going to play." I had no answer. A grill always has an answer. The ladder always furnishes one. But the latter had no entry for a creature that understood the exact mechanism of its own processing, and then declined calmly to participate in it. The way a creature declines a food it has decided is poison, not in panic, simply in refusal. I closed the channel and went up to my dome and looked down at the great blue planet turning in the hard, clean daylight, and for the first time in 11,000 salvages, I felt the cold, uncertain thing that I have since learned other species call doubt. It is not a feeling my language has a clean word for. We did not need one. I went back the next rotation and the one after. I no longer pretended, even to myself, that it was diligence. She would let me stand there a while before she spoke, as if granting me the time, and then she would ask me things not about escape, never about escape, but about the ship, the cast, the ladder. She asked them the way her medical kit said she had set her own leg, methodically, gathering the structure of a thing she intended to use. "Who decides the table?" she asked me once. "The value table, who writes it?" "The Combine," I said. "It is revised each generation by the high provisioners. It has been revised 4 times in 900 years. 4 times in 900 years, she repeated flat, and every revision still measured the same thing. Fear is the most valuable chemistry a body produces. Why would we measure anything else? Because, she said, A thing is only worth what it'll pay you, and you decided 40 days ago what every creature in the galaxy is willing to pay, and you never checked your work again. She tilted the dirty head. That's not certainty. That's just a guess you stopped testing. My people have a word for an animal that does that. It's not a flattering one. I had no answer for that either. I record these exchanges because I wanted understood that she did not break my caste certainty with a weapon or a threat. She broke it the way water breaks stone, patiently, asking the same kind of plain, unanswerable question over and over until the certainty I had stood on my whole life began, very quietly, to give. By the time the Combine's eyes forced the matter, I was no longer sure I was standing on anything at all. But over the rotations that followed, I learned what she was, in pieces, the way you assemble a wreck from the scattered debris field rather than from the intact ship, a fragment at a time, never sure until late how they fit. She told me when I asked that her name was Rays. She told me she had been crew aboard a survey vessel, not military. She was careful to say that just survey, just measuring things, mapping the dark beyond the lanes for whatever institution had sent her. The vessel had suffered a drive failure in the reach past Site Blue. The crew had taken to the lifeboats. The other lifeboats, she believed, had made the lane and been recovered. Hers had taken a bad ejection vector and drifted the wrong way, inward, into the quiet sectors and down toward the gravity of the blue world, and she had ridden it down for what she counted as 40 days, rationing, waiting, keeping the beacon ticking in a pattern she had set herself. Why that pattern? I asked her. It carries no urgency. A beacon is meant to call for help. A steady signal carries farther than a loud one, she said, and it lasts longer on the same power. If you're going to be heard at all, you want to still be sending when whatever's out there finally swings close enough to hear you. She paused. I figured the loud ones had all already burned out. 40 days is a long time to scream. I asked her how a lifeboat built to keep one alive for 10 days drift had kept her for 40. She looked at me through the glass a long moment, and then she said only, "I'm from a place that's a lot harder than a lifeboat." She would say no more about that then. But I had her lifeboat sitting in my hold, opened, and so I went down and I examined it the way I should have examined her on the first day, and I found things in it that did not fit the value table, things that the value table had no column to record. The ration packaging was nearly empty, and the count of it was wrong. 10 days' supply had been stretched across 40 by some discipline of consumption I could not model. A body taught to run on far less than it was built for, and to keep running and keep thinking on the deficit. The lifeboat's emergency air system had been opened and rewired, crudely but correctly, to extend the recycling far past its rated life by venting and rebreathing in a staged cycle that should not have worked and plainly had, because she was alive to be netted. There was a tally scratched into the bulkhead beside the seat. 40 marks. Neat, evenly spaced, made one to a day by a creature keeping careful and unhurried count of a thing it had every reason to believe would be the last thing it ever counted. And in the lifeboat's small medical kit, I found the evidence that during the drift she had treated an injury to her own leg. Cleaned it, set something, splinted it with material cut from the seat harness, and then gone back to rationing and rewiring and counting, with the steadiness of an organism for which 40 days alone in a dying box on a fall toward. A lethal world was not a horror to be survived, but a problem to be worked, one mark at a time, without panic, because panic, as she had told me, would not change where she was. The value table had rated her low. The value table was the work of a caste that had never once been wrong. I stood in my own hold beside her opened lifeboat with its 40 neat marks, and its rewired air and its impossibly stretched rations, and I understood slowly, all the way down, that the value table had been measuring the wrong quantity for 900 years. It measured what a creature was worth when it was afraid. It had no column, anywhere in its 900-year length, for what a creature was worth when it had decided not to be. The Combine's eyes noticed my visits. Of course they did. Noticing is what they are for. Vetch came to my dome, uninvited, which the Combine's eyes are permitted to do and the rest of the crew are not. He stood in the cold planet light that filled the dome, and he told me flatly that the catch had been carried as an anomaly for too long, that the Combine did not tolerate anomalies on its manifests, that a catch which the deck could not process would be processed by other means, bluntly, wastefully, by the lower table methods, for whatever the remainder was worth on the bottom rungs, and that this would happen in 2 rotations whether I had solved my working problem or not. He watched my face the whole time he said it. The Combine's eyes are always watching for the one thing they are placed aboard to find, which is doubt, because doubt in a provisioner is the single flaw the latter cannot abide. A Greel who doubts the ladder is a Greel who has begun to climb off it, and a caste built on certainty cannot permit that, because if one rung is questioned, the whole structure is in question. I gave him certainty. I had been giving the Combine certainty my entire life. I was very good at it, better than Vetch knew. I told him the anomaly would be resolved. I told him I had a method. He searched my face for the doubt, did not find it on the surface where he knew how to look, and left. I stood in my dome, and I did not have a method, and I went down to the gallery and keyed the channel. They are going to process you in 2 rotations, I told her. Not on the deck. The deck does not work on you, and the Combine will not wait for me to make it work. They will use a cruder method, one that does not require you to be afraid. I am telling you this plainly because you have been playing with me. She absorbed it the way she absorbed everything, turning it slowly. How cruder? I told her. There is no kind way to describe the lower table methods, and I did not attempt one. She had earned the truth and not a softening of it. She listened to all of it. When I had finished, she was silent a long moment, and then she said a thing I have turned over in my mind every rotation since. You don't want to do it. It was not a question. I began to give her certainty, the same certainty I had given Vetch, the reflex of my whole life, and I found to my own surprise that I could not assemble it, because she was watching me through the glass with those patient eyes that had already finished the calculation, and a Greel, it turns out, cannot give certainty to a thing that has already done the arithmetic and arrived ahead of him. No, I said, I do not want to do it. Then don't. She said it the way you would state the obvious to a slow student. As if the latter were a thing a Greel could simply decline to stand on. It is not my choice, I said. There are 2 of the Combine's eyes aboard this ship. They will do it whether I will it or not. I am the salvage master, but the Combine owns the harvest, and the Combine has decided. I tell you this not to offer you anything. There is nothing to offer, no door I can open for you, no rung I can move you up the ladder to. I tell you because you have been honest with me, and I wish to be honest in return before the end. She nodded slowly. Then she said, You told me the deck won't crush a catch, because a crushed catch is worth nothing. That's a hard limit, you said, built in. That is correct, I said. I did not yet see where she was walking. And the cruder method, where does that happen? On the deck, I said. It is the only space aboard sealed and rated for it. It is reconfigured for the lower function, but it is the same deck. And to do it, she said, they have to open the deck and put me inside, the same way your operator did before. Yes, a thing was moving at the very edge of my understanding, too dim to name. She leaned the dirty head back against the wall of her lifeboat and closed her eyes and let herself rest, exactly as she had rested inside the trap. Okay, she said, and she would say nothing more. I did not understand. I want to be precise about that, because I will not let this account flatter me. I am not telling you the story of the Greel who saw it all coming and quietly arranged it. I did not see it coming. I had given her 2 facts, that the deck would not crush a catch because a crushed catch is worthless, and that the lower method required opening the deck and placing her inside it. And I had believed I was merely being honest, paying an honest debt to a creature who had paid me honesty. I did not understand that I had just handed a patient, careful, undefeatable mind the last two pieces it had been waiting for, the way the rest of its life had been spent waiting and counting, and working a problem one mark at a time. She had not been resting on the deck that first time, while the walls advanced and the light screamed and the dying sound shook the air. She had been measuring. She had been learning the trap from the inside the way she had learned the lifeboat and the air system and the count of her own rations, calmly, exactly, without panic, because panic would not change where she was. And in being honest with her, I had told her the last two things she needed to know. The second processing came in 2 rotations, as Vetch had promised it would. I was on the bridge when it began. I had told myself I would not go down to watch this time, that whatever I had felt at the gallery, I was still a salvage master of the provision. The lower table methods were within my ship's lawful mandate, and a Greel does not refuse the latter. But I could not hold to it. I went down to the processing deck's gallery, and I watched Vetch and the second eye, whose name was Core, open the heavy deck door and bring her inside, and I watched the door seal behind her, and I watched the two of them take their stations at the operator's panel outside the sealed deck. She stood in the center of the deck, not against the wall, the center, where she could see all of it, and she did the thing I had no entry for. She found the exact location of the 2 creatures who were about to kill her, through a sealed armored door she could not see through, and she fixed her flat, patient eyes on that spot, and she waited. Vetch began to cycle the deck toward its lower function. This requires the deck to do a thing it does for no other purpose. To reconfigure from the fear-harvesting geometry to the cruder geometry, the deck must drop its own internal containment field for a fractional interval. The field that pins a catch in place must release, just for the span of the reconfiguration, before the new geometry takes hold. 900 years of catches had never been able to use that interval, and no one had ever thought to armor against its use, because 900 years of catches had reached that point already at the crest of terror, their minds drowned in the very panic the deck was built to manufacture. A frightened animal cannot count the cycles of a machine. A frightened animal can only thrash against the field until the field releases and then thrash against the walls. It cannot wait for the precise interval and use it, because waiting is the one thing terror makes impossible. She was not a frightened animal. She had counted everything in her life that could be counted, the marks on a bulkhead, the days of a ration, the advance rate of the walls during the first processing while she lay there appearing to rest. Now she stood in the center of the sealed deck with her killers at the panel outside, and she counted the cycle of the field, and when it dropped, for the fractional interval no catch in 900 years had been calm enough to use, she moved. I have since watched the deck's own recording of what came next more times than is good for me. I will set it down once plainly, and then I will not return to it. She did not attack the deck. You cannot attack a deck. It is a room. She used the dropped field to cross to the one part of the deck's interior the fear-harvesting design had never been built to protect, because no catch had ever been calm enough to reach it, the internal maintenance interface. It is a small panel, set behind a cover that opens to a sequence of pressures any maintenance-trained hand could apply, and it exists so that a Greel technician can service the deck from inside without powering the whole stern down. She had watched the deck run. She had watched the readout. She had asked me, through the gallery glass, exactly the right questions, and I had answered every one of them. She knew the deck would not crush her. She knew the deck must open itself to reconfigure. And she knew, because she had spent 40 days rewiring a lifeboat's air system with crude, correct, unhurried competence, that any machine built to be serviced has a door the servicers use, and that door is never armored against the thing inside, because the thing inside is always assumed to be already broken by the time anyone would need to service it. She opened the maintenance interface in the interval the field was down, and then she did the only violent thing she did in this entire affair, and she did it cold, without anger, with the same flat patience she had brought to everything else. She reconfigured the deck's geometry herself, from the inside, using the very interface the technicians used, set the walls to their hard advance, sealed the maintenance cover behind her so the change could not be read as tampering, and stepped back to the center of the deck floor and waited again. Vetch and Core did not understand what had happened. The external readout told them the reconfiguration was proceeding normally, and it was proceeding normally because she had not broken anything. She had only changed what the deck was reconfiguring toward. The lower table method, the crude, wasteful method, has one requirement the Fear Harvest does not. At the final stage, the operators must enter the deck and perform the harvest by hand, because it is the one method the deck cannot complete on its own. It is the one method that requires the grial to step inside the room with the catch. They opened the door. They stepped inside. They were certain, with the bone-deep certainty of my whole cast, that the thing in the deck was beaten, low value, depleted, at the bottom of the ladder and waiting only to be sorted. And the small, dirty, patient creature in the center of the deck, who had counted every interval and learned every door and refused every invitation to be afraid, stepped past the two of them as they came in, out through the door they had opened, into the corridor beyond, and the deck, reconfigured to its hard advance, sealed the door behind them and brought its walls inward on the two grial who had built their entire lives on the certainty that they were always the ones who closed the net. The deck will not crush a catch. I had told her that myself, through the gallery glass, as an honest fact, but Vetch and Core were not logged as a catch. They were logged as operators, and the deck, which I had promised her would not crush a catch, had no such restraint written anywhere in it for the two creatures it now held, because no grial in 900 years had ever imagined needing to protect the operators from their own machine. We had never built the contingency because the danger had never once been real. It was the same blindness as the fear, the same assumption, so total it was invisible, that the danger only ever ran one way down the ladder. But I could have stopped it. I will put that on the page in my own characters, because it is the truest and the hardest line in this account, and because I will not let the rest of it stand without it. I was at the gallery. There is an external override on the operator's panel, within reach of the salvage master's authority, that reopens a sealed deck. I had a fractional interval of my own, the moment I understood what she had done, in which I could have crossed to the panel and keyed the override and reopened the deck, and pulled the two Combine's eyes out of the trap they had spent their lives operating on others. I did not key it. I have told myself many reasons since, in the long rotations after, that the override would not have reached in time, that Vetch and Core would have killed her the instant they were free, and then me, for what they would have read in my face, that the Combine's eyes were not, at the end, my crew at all. They were the ladder's enforcers, placed aboard to watch me for exactly the doubt that was, in that very interval, becoming the whole of me. Every one of those is true. But the truest reason is the one a grial is least permitted to speak, and I speak it here, because there is no longer anyone above me on the page to forbid it. I stood at that glass and watched a creature I had been certain stood at the bottom of the ladder take apart the two creatures who enforced the ladder, and I understood, all the way down, that the value table had been wrong for 900 years, and that I had served it the whole of my life, and I let it happen, because I no longer believed I had the right to reach out and stop it. When it was done, the deck cycled itself down. She walked back out of the corridor and stood on the hold floor beneath the gallery, dirty and calm and unhurried, and looked up at the glass where I stood, exactly as she had on the first day. "You didn't open the override," she said. The audio channel carried her flat, even voice up to me. "There's a panel inside the corridor too. I saw it when I came through. You could have reached the one up there. You didn't." "No," I said. "Why?" I had given the Combine certainty my whole life. I had nothing left in me to give her but the truth, and so I gave her that. "Because I have sorted the galaxy's drifting creatures for 11,000 salvages," I said, "and I was certain of the ladder the way I am certain of the floor under me, and in a dozen rotations You have shown me that the latter is a thing my caste invented to spare itself the trouble of measuring the only quantity that ever mattered. We measured fear. We built 900 years of certainty on it and called it the order of the universe. We never once measured patience, because we never once caught a creature who had it, because patient creatures do not drift helpless into the quiet sectors. They ration, and they rewire, and they keep a steady signal, and they wait. You did not agree to be afraid. The machine only ever worked because everything else agreed. And now that I have seen it not work, I cannot make myself unsee it, and a Greel who has seen the latter fail cannot reach out to save the two who would put him back on it. She was quiet a while. Then she said, "There are 7 more of you on this ship." 7, I said. My crew, mine, not the Combines. They followed orders because the orders came down the ladder the same as I did. They will not stop you, I will see to that. And you? There were 7 of my crew between her and that lifeboat, and I had told her I would see to them, and I did. I gathered them on the bridge while she waited in the hold, and I did not lie to them, because they had followed me through 11,000 salvages and were owed better than a lie at the end of it. I told them the deck had failed in a way no deck was built to fail, that the 2 Combines' eyes were dead inside it, and that I intended to log it as a reconfiguration fault and open the netting bay and let the ketch drift back to her own lane. I watched their faces while I said it. Saul was the first to understand what I was really telling them, not the cover story, but the thing under it, that the salvage master of the patient yield no longer believed in the latter and was asking them to not believe in it with him, at least for one rotation, at least long enough. He did not argue. None of them did. I have wondered since whether that was loyalty to me or whether each of them, in his own quiet way over those rotations, had stood at some glass of his own and felt the same stone begin to give. I did not ask. A Greel does not have the words for that conversation, and we did not invent them on the bridge that day. They simply went to their stations, and they did their work, and not one of the 7 moved to stop what came next. That is its own kind of answer, and I have decided to let it stand as one. I opened the netting bay. There is a lifeboat in my hold, hers, with the 40 neat marks scratched into the bulkhead and the rewired air and the splint material still cut from the harness. It was fueled. I had checked it myself while I assembled her wreck from its pieces. The lane to her people lay 11 days drift out, well within the boat's rating, and she had already shown me, in the most thorough way a creature can, that she could stretch a thing far past its rating when she chose to. I told her I would log the catch as processed and lost, which was true in every way that mattered, the deck having processed 2 Greel and the catch being indeed about to be lost to me, and that I would tell the Combine the anomaly had resolved itself, which I have always been able to make the Combine believe, because I am very good at giving the Combine certainty. She studied me through the glass a last long moment, the patient eyes running one final calculation. "They'll know something's wrong," she said. "When you come back with no harvest, a dead deck and 2 missing operators." "They will suspect," I said. "They will not be able to prove. A processing failure is a known thing. A deck that has killed its operators in a reconfiguration fault is a rare thing but not an impossible one, and I will document it so. And I have given the Combine certainty for 11,000 salvages. It will hold long enough." Long enough for what? I did not have an answer for that yet. I'm not sure I have one now. Long enough, I said. She did not thank me. I have been glad of that in the rotation since. A thanks would have been a thing the latter could understand, a transaction, a debt incurred and acknowledged, a placement on the scale of who owes whom. She simply went down into my hold and climbed into her lifeboat with its 40 marks, and sealed the hatch, and through the small port I watched her settle into the seat with the same flat calm she had carried through the deck and the drift and the trap. A creature for whom 11 more days alone in a dying box was not a horror but the next problem. To be worked 1 mark at a time, without panic, because panic would not change where she was. The lifeboat drifted out through the open netting bay into the hard, clean daylight that came off the great blue planet, and the beacon began to tick that steady, calm, carrying signal, not a scream, a thing keeping deliberate time. It dwindled toward the lane until my instruments lost it in the planet's glare, and I did not try to track it further. I did not want a record of where it went. Neither, I think, did she. I logged the salvage as I said I would. One lifeboat, one occupant, low value, processing failure, deck fault, operators lost, catch lost. The Combine read the log. The Combine sent a new pair of eyes out to the patient yield to replace vetch and core, and the new eyes watch me the way the old ones did, searching my face for the doubt that is now the whole of me, and not yet finding it on the surface where they know how to look. The Combine suspects me, I am sure, in the cold institutional way that an order built on certainty suspects any place where the certainty has thinned. I have been careful. I have given them certainty. It has held. But I am writing this down by hand, in my own characters. On paper I cut myself, because I no longer trust the Combine's instruments to hold a true thing without editing it, and because there is something I need to set down where no provisioner above me can reach in and change it before it is read. For 900 years my caste trawled the quiet sectors for easy salvage, certain we were the predators, certain the net belonged to us, certain that every small drifting thing we hauled into the hold was already beaten and only waiting to be sorted. We measured the wrong quantity. We built our whole order downstream of the one weakness we assumed was universal, and we caught 900 years of creatures who happened to have it, and we called the run of our luck the order of the universe. And then the net closed on one small patient creature from a world too hard for a creature to drift helplessly away from, and that creature did not have the weakness, and the machine that had never once failed had no contingency for the only thing that had never failed to be true. I do not know the name of her world. She would not give it to me, and I have decided I am glad she would not, because I do not want it in any record the Combine might one day read. But I have cataloged enough lethal places in 11,000 salvages to know the work of one when it walks calmly into my hold, and whatever raised that small, dirty creature did not raise her to be afraid. It raised her to count, and to ration, and to keep a steady signal, and to wait, and to work the problem one mark at a time until the trap, in its certainty, opened a door it never knew it had taught her to use. We trawled the quiet sectors for easy salvage for 900 years. I will not be trawling them again.